The sky above New York City turned dark, but it wasn't because of clouds or a storm. Giant ships descended from space, their metallic surfaces glinting in the sunlight. They were enormous, far bigger than anything humans had ever built. These ships belonged to the Vraxians, an alien race no one on Earth had seen before. The ships hovered silently for a moment. Then a loud voice boomed across every radio, television, and phone. It was deep and cold, and it sent shivers down the spines of everyone who heard it. "Humans of Earth," the voice said, "you are weak. You are divided. Surrender now, or your world will be destroyed." People froze where they stood. Some screamed, others ran, and many just stared at the sky, unable to believe what was happening. In the middle of the chaos, Jason Cole stood calm. He was a fighter pilot, a man who had spent years flying jets in battles around the world. His face was hard, his jaw clenched tight. Next to him was Laura Bennett, an engineer with sharp eyes and quick hands. She had spent her life building weapons and designing systems to protect Earth. Both of them had faced danger before, but nothing like this. Jason turned to Laura. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear rippling through the air. Laura shook her head. "This isn't like any war we fought before. These things, they're not human." Jason nodded. He knew she was right, but he also knew one thing for sure. Giving up wasn't an option. "We'll figure it out," he said. "We always do." The first attack came without warning. Bright beams of light shot down from the alien ships, striking buildings and streets. Explosions erupted everywhere, shaking the ground and sending people scrambling for cover. Smoke filled the air, and the sound of screams mixed with the roar of collapsing structures. Jason didn't waste a second. He ran toward his jet, climbing into the cockpit with practiced ease. Within minutes, he was in the air, joining a squadron of other pilots rushing to meet the enemy. The Vraxian fighters were unlike anything Jason had ever seen. Sleek and fast, they darted through the sky like insects, their movements precise and calculated. Jason's team tried to fight back, firing missiles and shooting cannons, but the aliens seemed to anticipate every move. One by one, human jets were shot down, their pilots lost in fiery crashes. Jason gritted his teeth, pushing his plane harder than ever before. He managed to hit one of the alien ships, sending it spiraling toward the ground. But even as he celebrated the small victory, he knew it wasn't enough. Back on the ground, Laura watched the battle unfold on screens inside a secure command center. Her fingers flew over keyboards as she analyzed data streaming in from satellites and radar. She saw patterns in the way the Vraxians moved, in how they coordinated their attacks. There was something almost mechanical about it, as if they weren't thinking for themselves but following orders from somewhere else. Laura leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. If she could find the source of their control, maybe she could disrupt it. As the day wore on, the situation grew more desperate. The Vraxians showed no signs of slowing down. Their message was clear. They intended to wipe out humanity unless someone stopped them. Jason and Laura exchanged worried looks when they met later that evening. They both knew the odds were against them, but they also knew one important truth. Earth's fighters had faced impossible challenges before, and if history taught them anything, it was that surrender was never the answer. Jason broke the silence. "They think we're weak," he said, "but they don't know us. Not yet." Laura smiled faintly. "Then let's show them." And with those words, the two began planning their next move, determined to turn the tide of the battle and save their world. The second day of the invasion began with a deafening roar as more Vraxian ships descended from orbit. Their sleek fighters streaked across the sky, targeting military bases and cities without mercy. Jason Cole was already airborne, leading his squadron into battle once again. The memory of yesterday's losses weighed heavily on him, but he pushed it aside. There was no time for grief, only action. As Jason's jet screamed through the clouds, he spotted a group of Vraxian fighters closing in on a convoy of supply trucks below. Civilians were scrambling to escape, their faces pale with terror. Without hesitation, Jason dove toward the enemy, firing his cannons in short bursts. His shots hit their mark, sending one alien ship spiraling out of control. But before he could celebrate, two more Vraxians turned their attention to him, their weapons locking onto his plane. "Jason, break left," came a voice over the radio. It was Laura Bennett, guiding him from the command center. Jason obeyed instantly, pulling his jet into a sharp turn just as a beam of energy seared past his wing. He gritted their teeth, knowing how close he had come to being blown apart. The battle raged on, chaotic and relentless. Human pilots fought valiantly, but the Vraxians seemed unstoppable. Their movements were eerily precise, almost like they knew what the humans would do before they did it. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting something far beyond their understanding. Back at the command center, Laura stared at her screens, frustration building inside her. She replayed footage of the dogfights, studying every detail. Something about the Vraxians' tactics felt off. They weren't improvising or adapting. They were following a script, executing maneuvers with robotic efficiency. Laura leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. If she could figure out the pattern, maybe she could find a way to counter it. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden transmission from Jason. "We've got one of them," he shouted, his voice tense but excited. Against all odds, Jason's team had managed to disable an alien fighter, forcing it to crash land in a remote desert. Laura immediately sent a recovery team to retrieve the pilot. Hours later, the captured Vraxian was brought to a secure facility. It was tall and insect-like, its body covered in shimmering armor. Its eyes glowed faintly as it glared at its captors. Jason stood in front of the creature, his arms crossed. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Why are you doing this?" The Vraxian let out a low, guttural laugh. "You think your questions matter?" It sneered, its voice harsh and metallic. "Your kind is weak. Your resistance is meaningless." Jason clenched his fists, anger rising in his chest. "You don't know us." The alien tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "We know enough. Your species fights among itself, divided and selfish. You will fall, just like all the others." Laura stepped forward, her expression calm but firm. "What others? Who else have you attacked?" The Vraxian hesitated for a moment, then smirked. "Countless worlds. None survived." The room fell silent. Jason exchanged a glance with Laura, both of them absorbing the weight of the alien's words. The Vraxians weren't just invaders. They were conquerors, a force that had swept through the galaxy, leaving destruction in their wake. Humanity wasn't their first target, and it wouldn't be their last. But instead of fear, Jason felt a spark of defiance ignite within him. "They're wrong," he said quietly, turning to Laura. "We're not like the others. We've faced wars before. We've rebuilt after losing everything. This isn't over." Laura nodded, determination hardening her features. "If we want to win, we need to think differently. These aliens rely on patterns, on predictability. We'll use that against them." Jason smiled faintly. "Then let's get to work." Over the next few hours, Jason and Laura pored over maps and data, brainstorming strategies. They knew brute force alone wouldn't be enough. To stand a chance, they would have to outsmart the Vraxians and prove that Earth's fighters were unlike anything they had ever encountered. For now, the battle was lost. But the war was far from over. Jason Cole sat in the dimly lit briefing room, staring at a map spread across the table. The lines and markings on it represented battlefields, supply routes, and enemy positions. But no matter how long he studied it, the solution to defeating the Vraxians didn't come. Laura Bennett stood nearby, her arms crossed as she leaned against the wall. Both of them were exhausted, their minds racing with questions they couldn't answer. "We're missing something," Jason said finally, breaking the silence. "We've faced impossible odds before. Why does this feel so different?" Laura nodded slowly. "Because they're not fighting like us. They don't make mistakes. They don't hesitate. It's like they're machines. Jason frowned. But they're not machines. They're aliens. There has to be a way to beat them. Laura pushed herself off the wall and walked over to the table. She tapped a spot on the map where one of the largest battles had taken place. Look at this. Every time we attack, they respond the same way. They adapt instantly, but only within certain limits. It's like they follow rules we don't understand yet. Jason leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. So what do we do? Try to learn their rules. Exactly, Laura replied. And I think I know where to start. She led Jason to an old archive room deep within the military base. Dusty shelves lined the walls, filled with books, files, and reels of film. Laura pulled out a thick binder labeled Historical Tactics *. Inside were detailed accounts of battles fought throughout human history, wars between nations, revolutions, and even skirmishes between small groups. Laura flipped through the pages, pointing out examples. See this, she said, showing Jason a diagram of a battlefield from centuries ago. These soldiers were outnumbered, surrounded, and outgunned. But they used decoys to trick the enemy into splitting their forces. The invaders fell for it, and the smaller army won. Jason studied the diagram, his brow furrowing. You're saying we should use tricks. Deception. Exactly, Laura said. The Vraxians rely on patterns. If we give them something unexpected, something they can't predict, we might have a chance. As they continued their research, Jason remembered someone who could help, a retired general named William Hayes. He had been a legend in his time, known for his unconventional strategies and ability to turn losing battles into victories. Jason reached out to him, and within hours, General Hayes arrived at the base. Hayes was older now, his hair gray and his face lined with age, but his eyes still burned with intensity. He listened carefully as Jason and Laura explained the situation. When they finished, he nodded thoughtfully. You're right about one thing, Hayes said. This isn't just about firepower. It's about thinking differently. Let me tell you about a battle I fought years ago. For the next hour, Hayes shared stories of ambushes, feints, and diversions that had turned the tide in desperate situations. Jason and Laura hung on every word, taking notes and asking questions. By the end of the conversation, they had a plan forming in their minds. That night, Laura stayed up late, working on modifications to Earth's drones. She integrated new programming designed to mimic unpredictable behavior, random flight patterns, sudden changes in speed, and unexpected attacks. If the Vraxians thought they could predict human movements, they were about to get a rude awakening. Meanwhile, Jason gathered his squadron for a private meeting. He explained the new strategy. Instead of meeting the Vraxians head-on, they would draw them into traps. Decoy ships would lure the enemy into vulnerable positions, while hidden fighters struck from behind. It was risky, but it was their best shot. As dawn approached, Jason looked out the window at the dark sky. The Vraxians were still out there, waiting to crush humanity. But for the first time since the invasion began, Jason felt a flicker of hope. They think they know us, he muttered under his breath. But they're wrong. With renewed determination, Jason and Laura prepared for the next phase of the war. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. Jason Cole tightened his gloves as he stood near the launch bay, staring at the sleek fighter jets lined up in rows. Each one was armed with advanced weapons, but more importantly, they carried a new program Laura Bennett had developed. The drones accompanying them were no longer predictable. They now moved erratically, designed to confuse the Vraxians. Jason knew this mission was dangerous, but it was also their best chance to strike back. The target was a massive Vraxian supply depot orbiting Earth. It floated silently in space, a fortress of metal and glowing lights. Inside, it stored weapons, fuel, and other resources the aliens needed to keep their invasion going. If Jason's team could destroy it, they would cripple the Vraxians' ability to fight. But getting close wouldn't be easy. The depot was heavily guarded, surrounded by layers of ships and energy shields. Laura stood beside Jason, her face pale but determined. She held a tablet showing real-time data about the depot's defenses. "You'll have 10 minutes once you're inside," she said. "Any longer, and they'll overwhelm you." Jason nodded. 10 minutes is all we need." He turned to his team. 6 of the best pilots Earth had left. They were quiet, their expressions serious. None of them spoke, but they didn't need to. Everyone understood what was at stake. Jason climbed into his jet, strapping himself in and powering up the engines. One by one, the other pilots followed suit. As the hangar doors opened, Jason's voice crackled over the radio. "Let's show them what we're made of." The squadron launched into space, their jets cutting through the void like arrows. Laura watched from the command center, her fingers flying over keyboards as she guided them toward the depot. On her screens, dozens of Vraxian fighters appeared, racing to intercept the humans. Jason's team split into 2 groups, drawing the enemy away from the main objective. Explosions lit up the darkness as missiles streaked across the battlefield. Jason led the second group straight for the depot, weaving through a storm of enemy fire. His heart pounded as alarms blared in the cockpit, warning him of incoming attacks. He pushed the jet harder, dodging beams of light that tried to tear him apart. Behind him, 2 pilots weren't so lucky. Their ships exploded in bursts of flame, leaving trails of debris floating in space. "We're almost there." Laura's voice came through the radio, sharp and urgent. 3 more kilometers. Jason gritted his teeth, focusing on the massive structure ahead. The depot loomed larger with every second, its surface bristling with turrets and defensive drones. Just as they reached the outer shield, Laura activated the experimental drone she had programmed. Dozens of small machines shot forward, darting chaotically around the Vraxian defenses. The aliens hesitated, their systems struggling to track the unpredictable movements. "Now," Jason shouted. His team fired everything they had, blasting through the weakened shield and diving into the depot. Inside, the corridors were dark and cramped, filled with crates of alien technology. Jason spotted a control panel and signaled for his team to cover him. He landed his jet and sprinted toward the panel, pulling out a device Laura had given him. It was a bomb, powerful enough to destroy the entire depot. As Jason worked, the sounds of battle echoed outside. The remaining pilots fought desperately to hold off the Vraxians, while Jason set the timer. His hands trembled slightly, but he forced himself to stay focused. When the bomb was ready, he ran back to his jet and took off, joining the others in a frantic escape. 30 seconds, Laura's voice rang in his ears. The team flew as fast as they could, pursued by Vraxian fighters. Just as they cleared the depot, a massive explosion lit up space. The shockwave rocked their jets, sending some of them spinning out of control. Jason steadied his plane, looking back at the wreckage. The depot was gone, reduced to a cloud of debris. Back on Earth, Laura let out a shaky breath. The plan had worked, but at a cost. Half of Jason's team hadn't made it back. Still, the victory gave humanity hope. For the first time, they had struck a real blow against the invaders. Jason stared at the stars, his jaw clenched. "They thought they knew us," he muttered, "but they're wrong." The war was far from over, but Earth's fighters had proven they weren't done yet. The destruction of the Vraxian supply depot gave humanity a small but crucial victory. For the first time since the invasion began, people on Earth allowed themselves to feel a flicker of hope. Jason Cole and his team were hailed as heroes, their daring mission proof that the aliens could be beaten. But Jason didn't celebrate. He knew one successful strike wasn't enough to win the war. The Vraxians still had overwhelming numbers, advanced technology, and an unshakable belief in their superiority. Laura Bennett was already back at work, analyzing data from the destroyed depot. She sifted through fragments of alien tech recovered by reconnaissance teams, searching for weaknesses they could exploit. Late into the night, she sat in her lab, surrounded by glowing screens and scattered blueprints. Her mind raced with possibilities, but nothing seemed like a game-changer until she noticed something unusual. Among the wreckage, her team found strange devices unlike anything they'd seen before. These gadgets emitted faint signals, pulsing rhythmically like heartbeats. Laura realized they weren't weapons or tools. They were control units, used to coordinate the Vraxians' attacks. Each unit linked to a central hub somewhere in space, directing the invaders' movements with precision. If they could disable those hubs, the Vraxians would lose their ability to fight effectively. But how? The hubs were likely hidden deep within enemy territory, protected by layers of defenses. Laura stared at the devices, her thoughts racing. Then it hit her, an idea so risky it might actually work. She called Jason immediately. "We can use drones," she said when he arrived at the lab. "If we modify them to target the hubs autonomously, they could slip past the Vraxians' shields and take out the hubs without needing us to get close." Jason frowned. "It's risky. What if they figure it out?" "They won't," Laura replied firmly. "Remember what General Hayes told us. The Vraxians rely on patterns. If we send the drones in waves, moving unpredictably, they'll never see it coming." Jason nodded slowly. "It's worth a shot. Let's do it." As Laura worked on upgrading the drones, something unexpected happened. A group of refugees appeared near one of Earth's military bases. They weren't human. They were Zenari, a species that had fled the Vraxians decades earlier. Led by a woman named Ilara, they offered to help. Ilara explained that her people had been enslaved by the Vraxians until they managed to escape, finding refuge on Earth while hiding in plain sight. The Vraxians fear chaos, Ilara said during a meeting with Jason and Laura. They thrive on order and control. If you disrupt their systems, they panic. Ilara shared vital intelligence about the Vraxians' tactics and weaknesses. She revealed that the central hubs were located on key command ships spread across the fleet. With this information, Laura refined her drone designs, integrating Zenari technology to make them even more effective. The Zenari also provided stealth ships capable of sneaking behind enemy lines, a resource Jason planned to use for sabotage missions. With the new alliance in place, Jason devised a bold strategy. Instead of focusing all their forces on a single target, they would launch simultaneous strikes on multiple fronts. Drones would attack the central hubs, disabling the Vraxians' coordination. At the same time, Zenari ships would destroy supply lines, cutting off reinforcements. On the ground, civilian militias would rise up, freeing occupied territories and reclaiming resources. The plan was ambitious, but Jason and Laura believed it was their best chance. As they prepared for the next phase of the war, Jason felt a renewed sense of purpose. The Vraxians had underestimated humanity, and now they were about to pay for it. "They think they know battle," Jason said quietly, staring at a map of the galaxy. "But they don't know us." Laura smiled faintly. "Let's show them." Together, they rallied their forces, ready to unleash chaos upon the invaders. The battle ahead would be brutal, but humanity had one thing the Vraxians didn't: resilience. And that made all the difference. The day of the attack arrived, and tension hung heavy in the air. Jason Cole stood on the edge of the launch bay, watching as pilots climbed into their jets and engineers made final checks on the drones. Laura Bennett was nearby, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted settings on a control panel. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. If their plan worked, it could turn the tide of the war. If it failed, humanity might not survive. Jason turned to his squadron, his voice steadied despite the weight of what lay ahead. "We've trained for this. We've planned every detail. Stick to the mission and trust each other. Today, we fight for Earth." The pilots nodded, their faces grim but determined. One by one, the jets roared to life, engines vibrating through the air. The first wave launched into space, heading straight for the Vraxian fleet. Behind them, hundreds of drones followed, their erratic flight patterns already confusing the enemy sensors. On the ground, civilian militias armed themselves with whatever weapons they could find, ready to strike at occupied territories. Laura stayed behind, coordinating everything from the command center. Her screen showed real-time updates. Drone swarms approaching the central hubs, Zenari ships slipping past Vraxian patrols, and human fighters engaging the enemy head-on. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos, the kind that gave them a fighting chance. Jason led his team toward one of the largest Vraxian command ships. The vessel loomed ahead, its surface bristling with weapons and glowing with energy shields. As they approached, the Vraxians opened fire, beams of light cutting through space. Jason's squadron scattered, dodging attacks while drawing the enemy's attention away from the drones. Explosions lit up the darkness as missiles streaked across the battlefield. Drones are in position. Laura's voice crackled over the radio. 30 seconds to impact. Jason clenched his teeth, focusing on keeping his team alive. 2 more pilots were lost in the chaos, their ships exploding in bursts of flame. But there was no time to mourn. The drones reached the central hub and struck, disabling the ship's coordination systems. Across the fleet, similar attacks took place, throwing the Vraxians into disarray. Meanwhile, the Zenari ships executed their part of the plan. Using stealth technology, they slipped behind enemy lines and destroyed supply depots, cutting off the Vraxians' resources. Ilara herself led a daring raid on a heavily guarded transport ship, her voice calm and commanding as she directed her people. "Stay sharp," she said. "This is our chance to end their power." On the ground, civilian militias launched surprise assaults on occupied cities. Armed with makeshift weapons and sheer determination, they overwhelmed Vraxian forces caught off guard by the sudden uprising. Prisoners were freed, and vital resources were reclaimed. For the first time since the invasion began, hope spread among the people of Earth. Back in space, Jason's squadron regrouped after taking out the command ship. Smoke filled the cockpits, alarms blaring as damaged jets limped back toward Earth. But Jason didn't care about the damage. He stared at the wreckage of the Vraxian ship, his heart pounding with pride. They had done it. They had struck a major blow against the invaders. In the command center, Laura watched the screens, tears streaming down her face. The plan had worked. The Vraxians were retreating, their once perfect coordination shattered. She whispered to herself, "We showed them." But the victory came at a cost. Dozens of pilots were gone, their names added to a growing list of heroes. Cities lay in ruins, and millions of lives had been lost. Yet amid the destruction, something remarkable emerged: unity. Humanity had faced its darkest hour and refused to give up. Jason landed his jet and stepped out, his legs unsteady, but his spirit unbroken. He looked around at the battered survivors, their faces bruised but defiant. "They thought they knew battle," he said aloud, "but they don't know us." The war wasn't over, but for the first time, humanity believed they could win. And that belief was stronger than any weapon. The Vraxians were reeling, their once unstoppable fleet now scattered and disorganized. For the first time, they showed signs of fear. Their central hubs had been destroyed, cutting off communication between ships. Without coordination, their attacks became clumsy and ineffective. But Jason Cole knew better than to celebrate too soon. The Vraxians still outnumbered humanity, and their pride wouldn't let them retreat without a fight. Laura Bennett stood in the command center, her eyes glued to the screens. The data told a clear story. The invaders were regrouping around their largest remaining ship, a massive vessel that dwarfed everything else in the fleet. It was their primary command center, the heart of their operation. If it could be destroyed, the Vraxians would lose their ability to lead the invasion. But taking it down wouldn't be easy. It was heavily guarded, with layers of shields and weapons designed to repel any attack. Jason approached Laura, his face grim. "We need to hit that ship," he said. "It's our best chance to end this." Laura nodded, but her expression was troubled. "I know," she replied. "But getting close enough will mean sacrificing someone. That ship is a fortress." Jason didn't hesitate. Then I'll do it. Laura turned to him sharply, her voice rising. No, we can find another way. There isn't time, Jason said firmly. If we wait, they'll recover. You know it as well as I do. Laura stared at him, her eyes filled with anger and sadness. She wanted to argue, to insist there had to be another solution. But deep down, she knew he was right. Destroying the command ship required someone to get inside its defenses and plant explosives. A suicide mission. Jason had already made up his mind. Before leaving, Jason pulled Laura aside. If I don't make it back, he said quietly, tell everyone we showed them what Earth is made of. Laura swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay composed. You're coming back, she said, though her voice wavered. You have to. Jason smiled faintly. Take care of things here. All right. With that, he walked away, climbing into his jet for what might be his final flight. Laura watched him go, her hands trembling as she activated the drone swarms. Their erratic movements would provide cover for Jason's approach, distracting the Vraxians long enough for him to reach the command ship. In space, Jason's squadron launched one last assault, drawing the enemy's attention away from the command ship. Explosions lit up the darkness as drones and fighters clashed with Vraxian forces. Jason broke away from the battle, speeding toward the massive vessel ahead. Alarms blared in his cockpit as enemy fire streaked past him, but he pushed forward, dodging beams of energy and weaving through debris. As he reached the ship, Jason fired everything he had, blasting through its outer shield. His jet took heavy damage, smoke filling the cockpit, but he managed to land on the surface. He grabbed the explosives Laura had prepared and sprinted toward an access hatch, planting charges as quickly as he could. Behind him, explosions erupted, shaking the ship violently. Back on Earth, Laura monitored the mission, her heart pounding. She saw Jason's signal flicker on the screen as he worked. Come on, she whispered. Just a little longer. Finally, Jason's voice came over the radio. It's done. Get out of here. No, Laura shouted. Jason, you can still. The transmission cut off. A massive explosion lit up space, engulfing the command ship in flames. On the screens, Jason's signal disappeared. Silence fell over the command center. Laura sank into her chair, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to scream, to deny what had just happened. But instead, she forced herself to focus. Jason had given everything for this moment, and she wouldn't let his sacrifice be wasted. Outside, the Vraxian fleet began to retreat, their leadership shattered. The remaining ships flowed into deep space, leaving Earth battered but victorious. Laura clenched her fists, vowing to honor Jason's memory. They thought they knew us, she muttered. But they didn't. The war was over for now. But Laura knew the fight wasn't finished. Humanity had proven its strength, and she would ensure it stayed that way. The Vraxians were gone. Their ships vanished into the depths of space, leaving behind a planet scared but alive. The skies above Earth were quiet for the first time in weeks, the silence heavy with both relief and grief. Jason Cole's sacrifice had turned the tide of the war, and his name was already being spoken in whispers across the globe. He wasn't just a pilot anymore. He was a symbol of humanity's resilience. Laura Bennett stood on a hill overlooking what was left of New York City. The skyline was broken, its towering buildings reduced to jagged skeletons. Smoke still rose from some areas, but amid the ruins, people were beginning to rebuild. Laura's hands trembled as she clutched a small device in her pocket, the last recording Jason had sent before his final mission. She hadn't listened to it yet. She wasn't sure she could. Around her, life stirred again. Civilians worked together, clearing debris and helping the wounded. Refugees who had fled during the invasion were returning, their faces weary but hopeful. Even the Zenari, who had fought alongside humanity, stayed to lend a hand. Ilara walked among them, her presence calm and steady. You've shown us what courage looks like, she told Laura when they crossed paths. Your people will rise again. Laura nodded, though her throat felt tight. Rising again wouldn't be easy. Millions were dead, cities were in ruins, and the scars of war would take generations to heal. But there was something else now, something stronger than fear or despair. It was hope. For the first time, humanity saw itself not as divided nations or competing factions, but as one united species. In the days that followed, Laura threw herself into rebuilding. She used the lessons learned from the Zenari to create new technologies, ones designed not for destruction but for survival. Hybrid systems powered makeshift shelters, and drones were repurposed to deliver supplies to hard-hit areas. Slowly, life began to return to normal, or as close to normal as it could be. But Laura didn't forget Jason. She made sure no one else did either. At a ceremony held in his honor, she unveiled a fleet of new fighter jets, each bearing his name. Jason showed us that bravery isn't about being fearless, she said to the crowd gathered below. It's about standing up even when you're scared. He gave everything so we could live. Let's make sure his sacrifice means something. As the weeks turned into months, humanity reached out to other species, forming alliances with those who had suffered under the Vraxians. Together, they vowed to stand against future threats, united by shared pain and determination. Laura played a key role in these efforts, using her knowledge to bridge gaps between worlds. She often thought of Jason during these meetings, wondering what he would say if he could see how far they'd come. One night, alone in her lab, Laura finally listened to the recording Jason had sent. His voice was calm, almost peaceful. "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it back," he said. "Don't waste time mourning me. Focus on the future, for everyone who's counting on you. And remember, Earth is worth fighting for." Tears streamed down Laura's face as the message ended. She sat in silence for a long time, letting his words sink in. Then she wiped her eyes and returned to work. There was still so much to do, so many challenges ahead. But she knew one thing for certain. Humanity had faced its darkest hour and emerged stronger. Above her, the stars twinkled in the night sky. Somewhere out there, the Vraxians might regroup or another threat could rise. But Laura wasn't afraid. Earth had proven it could endure, and it would continue to do so, no matter what came next. "They thought they knew battle," Laura whispered, looking up at the heavens, "but they didn't know us." And with that, she stepped back into the light, ready to face whatever the future held.